listening to Dudeology, your place for cool stories, awesome stuff, and killer gear. Please like, subscribe, and share on your favorite listening platform. Now sit back and enjoy the show. Welcome to Dudeology. If this looks a little bit different for our viewers on YouTube, it's because we're coming to you from all different parts of this great country this evening. And joining us from the West Coast is the best coast is Jeremiah Rogers. Jeremiah, welcome to Dudeology Show.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and we have a lot to cover with Jeremiah this evening. But first, we want to let you know that this show is sponsored by Alter Ego Running. If you want to get one of the dopest of all the dope-ass hats and running gear out there, check them out at alteregorunning.com. As you can see, John Richardson is sporting one of the Alter Ego running hats, and Chris is modeling, I believe that's he's wearing the trucker hat, and he's modeling one of the gray camo hats out there. So Alter Ego Running, check them out. There's some phenomenal running gear for all for novice or hardcore runners alike, and use promo code RICH20, that's RICH20, for 20% off all your purchases at Alter Ego Running. So Chris, our producer extraordinaire, the man Gambino, or the man Bino, as we like to call him, how are we coming in this evening?
Coming in good, man. So Ernie Bono, episode 23, Get Bono Built, dropped off some smoked meat by my house today, pulled pork, some chicken thighs. It was on point, delicious. So I'm feeling pretty good.
That is awesome. I've been meaning to ask you this. Any relation to Childish Gambino?
Some say that we look alike, but you know, I mean, you can see the resemblance, but we're not.
Do you like his music? Do you like his music, Childish Gambino?
It's all right. It's all right. I feel like he kind of owes me a kickback on taking the name. I feel like, what did he use, like the Wu-Tang name generator? And all of a sudden he got like Childish Gambino.
Oh, totally. He was in that show too. He was in, what's the show where I think like Chevy Chase was the teacher? Community. It was like a community college show. Yeah. He was in that too. His song Redbone, though, I was listening to this weekend. That's a great song. Do yourself a favor. If you've never downloaded the song Redbone by Childish Gambino, check it out. It's top-notch stuff. And John Richardson, JR, how are we doing this evening, bud?
I'm doing well. I just got to go on record saying I have no idea what you guys just talked about for about 60 seconds. Who is Childish Gambino? Is he a rapper?
Look it up. No, man. He's an artist, man. He's puts out some great music. So check him out. Check out Childish Gambino. Check out the song. He's an actor. He's kind of a jack of all trades, similar to our guest Jeremiah Rogers. So Jeremiah, I was doing some research like we normally do with all of our guests who come on, and I saw some things like data scientist, avid traveler, photographer, a lot of cool stuff. And so we wanted to just chat with you tonight. We love what we say here is that there is no ordinary. Okay, so everyone's got an extraordinary story. So I know you got a ton of stuff to share with us this evening. But talk to us a little bit about how does one become a data scientist?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it. I think the joke is that a data scientist is a statistician who lives in San Francisco, which I think is probably more accurate. But when I was graduating from college, I studied math and I studied a lot of economics, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I went to see a professor. And he said, I looked at your resume. I went to him and I said, I want to be a professor like you. And he was like, no, you don't. And he basically, he said, look, I looked at your resume. You have the capability to get a job and like make money, and you should really do it. I think you'd enjoy making money more than you'd enjoy teaching. And he hooked me up with a company nearby that hired people into a job called analytics. And basically what I've done my whole career is look at almost every company has a database at this point. Everything they do goes into a database. And you just look at that database and figure out how to make the company run better. And after enough time doing it, you start to learn tricks. And it's, a lot of companies have big teams of people that do this now.
All right. So you've worked with some pretty big names, I guess, and mostly based in like the tech industry. I saw obviously Facebook was going to be probably the one that most people are most familiar with. When in your career were you involved with that organization?
I was, I think, 26. And so I was there for about 2.5 years, 26 to 28. And so my second job out of college, and I worked at a small car company in Virginia before that. And then Facebook was kind of legendary at the time I joined. Most people don't know this. They were pulling in people that didn't have super impressive college degrees. And so a lot of the companies in the Valley would pull in people that only went to Harvard or went to Stanford. And Facebook would just pull anyone they could get because they figured they had sort of an arbitrage there. So me and a lot of my friends from early Facebook went to state schools, studied math, studied computer science, and ended up getting these incredible jobs. And I left in 2014, so a long time ago.
So this was after they dropped the. Is that a true story? Like in the movie, Justin Timberlake's character says, it's called the Facebook, and he says, "We'll drop the." So I'm not sure if that's legend or if that's true.
That's true. After that happened, I think quite a bit. I think the company was 8,000 people when I joined, but of the 1,000 in kind of engineering and product, we were all in one big office. And it was kind of overcrowded. And so you saw everyone, and it felt like a very tiny company when I joined. By the time I left, it was 30,000. So it felt quite a bit bigger.
Yeah. What was the recruiting process like? Did you have you said they were pulling people from all over. How did that go?
Mm-hmm. I had become convinced that I wanted to move to California. I think I was meditating one morning and I was like, a lot of your problems would be solved if you moved to California. It kind of came as an insight. And so I decided I had to do it. And I spent probably 3 months filling out applications every day, editing my resume, making a custom resume for every company. And then I applied to a lot of companies with lesser names, like not as sort of big at the time. And they didn't get back to me, and Facebook moved really fast. And I think when you're growing from 8,000 people to 30,000 in 2 years, you have to it's a machine, right? How do we get people in? And so I just Saturday morning, I remember thinking, I bet Facebook has jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Like I bet people work there. And it hadn't clicked. It didn't click for a lot of people at the time. And so I just searched for their job page and found it and applied.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think moving to California will solve a lot of problems, right? But you hear about people going out there to being actors, and you forget a lot of times about how much industry there is, right? In the Bay Area, and Silicon Valley. One of the biggest bummers, just totally selfishly, is that through this whole kind of COVID thing, is I canceled like 2 trips to California because it's probably one of my favorite places to visit. So hopefully we'll get back there, and I got some making up to do on my travels out there. We talk about this day. There's so much, I think, nowadays. I was listening to sports talk this morning, and they're talking about these guys in the NFL who are using these data, using the big data analytics, like on this play, this gives me the percentage. This is the right call to make and everything. What do you think the genesis of kind of how our world is so much into these data analytics now, I guess, versus 10, 15, 20 years ago?
I think the big thing is it's so much easier to store stuff. Storage cost is really low. Everything's on a computer now. You can crunch the number. There's been a sort of compounding effect, right? Like for example, a lot of the statistics they're using in the NFL, they were probably developed to run big companies, right? They're developed to run companies like Facebook or AT&T. And then once that's developed and it's out in public, you can use it for anything you want. No one's going to develop a fancy stats package just for an NFL team. But once it exists, and once it's open source and distributed, you can use it for everything. So I think it's starting to touch anywhere where you can get a little bit of edge by being smarter in your decisions is starting to become a data focused business.
Yeah, so it's crazy too how it works, because I'm sure everyone probably has these questions. It's like, all right, so I listened to a Joe Rogan, Tulsi Gabbard podcast on my drive over this morning, and literally I open like my browser to look at something, and it's like, check out Tulsi Gabbard workout video, or Joe, like there was automatically there. I was like, how did you know that? So it's that. So you could create something that would do that for Dudeology. Maybe we could, have it pop up in everyone's browser.
Probably could. I don't know if I'd want
to. I'm kidding too with that, but it is kind of crazy how that works. And sometimes it's great, right? Because sometimes, like, man, I didn't even know that I was going to need that, but now that it's on my feed on Facebook, maybe I'll click on here and see. So big.
I saw a post. A friend of mine made it. The question that was like, it was a general question: if how much money would you pay to remove Facebook ads? And a lot of the responses were like, I wouldn't pay anything, because why would I'm outsourcing my thinking now. Facebook's just doing all the research for me. And I was like, never really thought about it that way. I don't like it,
Yeah.
but there are people that seem to not mind it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, Jeremiah, you've applied some of that skill set to the current pandemic situation. Is that correct?
What are you talking about in particular?
Yeah. Now,
Just so I remember.
have you worked with any of the data? We collect data all the time, right? And this thing
Mhm.
has changed so much. It's like, one day the numbers show this, one day they show that, and everything. Have you gotten any opportunity? Have you been asked to work on any of that kind of portion as it goes to like a public health, in the public health sector?
I did some work in college on
Yeah.
pandemics, and I think the the idea at the time was you wanted to figure out in a school what are your options. So I think in a lot of America they've shut the schools down, but one of the things we figured out at the time was you could just cancel lunch and cancel recess, and you want to basically shutting schools down can be very very expensive for the economy. I remember when I did this project, I didn't think it would be applicable anywhere, but if you shut school down, everyone's got to stay home, and then the parents can't go to work, and a lot of parents can't work from home or can't afford childcare. And so we did some work, probably 2006, in just what are the strategies to mitigate, keep kids going to school but mitigate the spread of disease. And then since the pandemic, I've done a little bit of digging. I tend to crunch numbers all the time. I don't know anything off the top of my head, but I tend to crunch. I've crunched a lot of just like what are the other ways we could have handled the pandemic, and looked at those numbers a bit as well.
Yeah, that's and one of the things I was talking with Chris and John earlier about is there's, I guess, what we would refer to as like anecdata. There seems like there's a lot there with
Mm-hmm.
like these anecdotal, like an N of one, right? Someone will say, well,
Mm-hmm.
I know what the numbers say or the big data says, but I knew a neighbor who XYZ happened to them, so I'm going to take that as truth because there's like a closeness to my relationship with that person versus, yeah, but there's a study with 10,000 people over here that shows something maybe vastly different. Does that, when you see kind of like, I guess we'd call it maybe bad data out there or people
Mm-hmm.
misquoting data, what's your opinion on that? How's that make you feel?
It's always a little, a lot of people have seen Fight Club, right? And they've seen probably the story about the guy on Fight Club who his job is to figure out when do you recall the car. And I think there's that, you get that kind of vibe sometimes a little too precise in your math. And it's obviously, if people are getting hurt and people are dying, it's terrible. But I think it's rare to find people in society who really think about both sides of the coin, right? So who think about, like if you lock people down for years on end, or it's coming up on a year now, like what is the cost to them and how do you balance that cost against deaths? And it's I wish I saw more of, just personally wish I saw more things like recommending people get exercise and take vitamin D, which seems like a $4 treatment that would be very helpful from everything I've seen, instead of not really getting a lot of prescriptive like health advice from the government, just saying stay home and cover your mouth.
So I'm an ops guy. So when I look at data, I'm always asking the people that work for me, hey, what's the story behind the data? What's it telling me? And I think that's a really important aspect of data in today's society, in the business world. And interestingly enough, data can tell all kinds of different stories, which I find, kind of neat, good and bad, in that you can, depending on how you present it, whether you use averaging or just, counts and things like that, it can tell a variety of different stories, which is pretty good if you wanted to tell the story that you wanted to tell, but bad if you're, trying to manipulate people's thinking. Do you deal with that very often?
Sorry, with stories behind data?
Yeah, well, like, do you, so I know there's multiple types of data scientists, but do you also deal in the visualization and the storytelling side of it?
Almost my entire job, yeah. It's not technically that complicated. A lot of it's just, is the number going up? Let's break the number apart and figure out why it's going up. Let's figure out who it's happening for. I'm trying to think of a good example for you. I mean, yeah, it's a lot of operations data. It's a lot of, here's where a lot of it's generally, you look at a company's spending and you typically find out that a really tiny percentage of the things they do are very wasteful and they burn most of their money there. And then you spend a lot of time digging into those, like particular cases, instead of, and telling those kind of stories.
Sure.
Yeah, and you had a great point, Jeremiah. You said, it's really not only our ability to collect the data, but our ability to store that data, right? You could run a clinical trial with 5,000 patients, based on one outcome, but you've stored that data and you can go back and extrapolate different outcomes, right? That could be helpful along that journey. And that's all like the data storage, right? I mean, you got like cloud servers, server farms, ships that float out in the ocean that are just full of servers that all just be able to just store data and data and data. And we're seeing that now, right? We kind of touched on a little bit in this kind of this currency trading, right? In the form of a cryptocurrency. I am a novice zero. Like I know enough to be dangerous. All right. So have you dabbled in this before, Jeremiah? Let me ask you that first. But
yeah, I'm into cryptocurrency quite a bit.
Okay. So if I'm like, so explain it to me, and I think probably for some of our viewers and a lot of our listeners who may be in the same boat that my Gen X mind kind of works in a certain way and can't quite grasp it. Break it down for me, and then I'm going to release JR, the other JR on the line, JR and Chris, to just geek out for a little bit because I know they got some questions on the whole cryptocurrency. So give me your high level overview of it if you don't mind.
Yeah, high level overview. I think probably better just to talk about Bitcoin in particular. I think I'm not really into other cryptocurrencies. There's a lot of crypto assets is what they call them, right? There's a lot of things that are in crypto, and it goes all the way from money, which Bitcoin is just money, to complicated contracts that are kind of like vending machines, to specific assets that are like you can buy paintings, you can buy like single copies of a painting called an NFT. And so there's a lot of these. It's non-fungible token. We can get into it, but it's basically like just like this thing behind me is a painting that's there's a specific one. You can buy specific individual things, but I think there's a lot of that. There's a huge explosion of different opportunities inside the crypto space. The only one I personally invest in is Bitcoin, and I think the reason for that is it's kind of like 1999, where everyone's kind of trying out their new ideas. Maybe we could use the internet for this. Maybe we could use it for pet food. Everyone's kind of over their skis a little bit. Those ideas are not very practical. But on the Bitcoin end, the best analogy I've heard is by the guy who created it, which is what if you made a metal, like a very precious metal that was very rare, but you could send it over a wire? And then what would happen if you could send that very precious metal over a wire? And so when you look at Bitcoin, effectively the only thing that they focus on with Bitcoin is scarcity and security. So they make it very scarce. There's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoins. And then when they make it very secure, so the way the network is secured and run requires massive amounts of electricity, much less, I think, still than the financial system. And overall, I think it's the right trade. I think it's a good idea that we can go into it, but the amount of electricity used for Bitcoin is really not, I think, a problem that people talk about. But so I think that Bitcoin as money is a thing I'm very interested in, and I think I spend a lot of time thinking about. There's a lot of questions that come up when people talk about Bitcoin, and one of them is, why does it go up and down all the time? Why is it not useful to buy a coffee? Why is it so volatile? Why is it so confusing? And the lens I like to look at it through is, what would happen if a new money appeared? Like if a new money appeared and it was digital and it was inside your computer, I get the sense that its rollout would be like 100% consistent with what you're seeing with Bitcoin, where not everyone knows about it. Like if you could, by the time you can use it to buy a coffee, it's going to be pretty far along in its road.
So yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I love the analogy of it kind of being like 1999. I think I told that to John on a car ride today. But Bitcoin is built on what I know, and I don't know very much, a platform called blockchain, which I think has a lot to do with storage and sort of decentralized storage. Can you go into that a little bit and why that's so important, like the technology behind Bitcoin?
Yeah. So when you look at the history of money, typically money has to be scarce. It has to be durable. It has to be broken into small pieces so you can interchange it. And there's a couple other properties you really look for. Easy to secure. And one of the great things about one of the problems we've gotten into in the past is gold was kind of the top form of money that was used throughout the world for a very long time. But because gold is so valuable, right? Like just a tiny little piece. I was at a friend's house. He had some gold. He had a tiny 1 gram piece that was, it's really, really tiny. That's worth $700. And so you couldn't pay for a coffee, for example, with a piece of gold. And what has happened over time is we put our gold into physical banks. The banks gave us paper. and then the banks tended to make a little bit more paper than they needed for the gold. They would have, let's say, 1,000 pounds of gold. They might make 2,000 pounds worth of paper and circulate it, and it kind of works out okay until the bank kind of fails. With Bitcoin, you have a very specific record that says that I sent money to John, right? Or I sent money to Chris. And then the money sits with Chris or sits with John until they decide to subsequently send it to someone else. And that offers a bunch of things. I mean, I think the main thing it really offers is auditability. So you can guarantee that there haven't been extra money or extra coins created, and you can figure out where all of it is. And it makes people very comfortable with it. You know very quickly you can run a command on a computer and in probably a minute sum up all the Bitcoins that have ever existed and account for where each of them is. And that makes people have a lot of trust in exactly how the system works.
Just don't lose your password, right?
Don't lose your password. Yeah, I keep mine. I think there's a couple ways to mitigate it.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking like this. So I have like a note or whatever, a locked note on my iPhone. It's got my password for for Hilton or Delta or whatever. And I'm like, this guy, you read the story, he's like, he's got like $1 billion or whatever it is worth of Bitcoin. He's like, I can't find my password. Oh well. So dude, write it down, man.
Yeah. There are better ways to keep it secure now that I think are much more accessible. And one of the ones I've used is called a 2 out of 3 signature system. But basically, there's 3 keys. One person has the other key, and I have 2 of them. And you need 2 keys to get into the Bitcoin. And so if I lose one of my keys, I can still get into it. I can ask that other person to give me their key. And so there's a lot of, if you're running a big company, for example, and you have billions of dollars, you can you can have 5 keys and require 3 signatures. And then maybe the CEO and the CTO and someone else all carry them and they can sign. And so there are ways to keep it secure, but it's a little complicated for sure. And if you lose the password, it's gone.
Yeah. Now have larger organizations like larger for-profit companies started to put some assets into Bitcoin and into the cryptocurrency?
Yeah, some smaller ones people haven't heard of too much. I mean, Square, which runs Cash App, they have about 50 million. And then MicroStrategy, which is a company, I think, based in Northern Virginia, put about $1 billion into Bitcoin. And that was a little bit bold, but they had $500 million in cash. They didn't know what to do with the cash, and they decided to buy Bitcoin with it to preserve it. And then today it came out. It's still not clear if this is true, but there's rumors now that Harvard and Yale and I think Princeton are buying Bitcoin for their endowments, like the kind of
endowments.
Yeah, I've seen MicroStrategy stock is like through the roof. So it's doing something right.
Well, it's probably like anything, right? It's diversifying, right? I mean,
well, that's kind of the question I wanted to get to on diversifying. How big is it right now where, institutional investors are starting to look at Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies versus the traditional, stock market route?
How big is so Bitcoin itself, if you sum up the value of all the coins that exist, it's in the top 10 probably for like companies in the US. It's about $700 billion, maybe 600 billion. So it's up there with Facebook and Apple and Google. It's kind of one of those big things. And then, why are they putting the money into it? It's been the top performing asset for, I think, the last 10 years. It's up just an insane amount. And I think as you look at how gold is typically what people have bought as an inflation hedge, gold has really not done as well as people would have expected. And so I think if you've got $20 billion, putting 1% of your money into Bitcoin's not really that scary, right? Maybe it goes to 0 and you lose 1% of your money, but if it goes up, you get to capture those rewards.
What are some common platforms to, like, say your novice, like Brandon, wants to get involved? What would be the easiest way for him to do it?
I think the best recommendation I've kind of heard is to, figure out how much you want to own in total, like what percentage of your total money. Let's say you had, for the sake of argument, like $1,000. So you say, I want to have $100 worth of Bitcoin. Buy a chunk in the beginning, just up front, maybe $50, and then kind of average in over time. And so you can do that with Coinbase is a really good one, or with I've heard a lot of positive things about Swan Bitcoin, which has slightly lower fees. And Swan is good if you want to buy in, say, every week. You can set up, or every other week, you can set up Swan to take $100 out every paycheck and just kind of average in over time, which I think until you really know what you're doing, you probably don't want to. I bought in kind of in big chunks pretty quickly, and I'm fortunate because it's up a bit since then, but it's pretty scary and it can be pretty nerve wracking to watch it go up and down.
Mhm. I noticed that I think I can buy it on Robinhood. I haven't purchased it on Robinhood, but is that a platform that you feel comfortable, or you would feel comfortable purchasing it on?
I wouldn't purchase it on Robinhood because you can't move it off of Robinhood. And so
Oh,
really one of the main things about Bitcoin is to think about it like I tend to think of it like a last chance asset other than gold, right? Like you kind of want to have it with you if you have to go.
hmm.
um, and having it on Robinhood, it can be seized, it can be taken. One of the nice things about Bitcoin is you could get on a plane out of the country if you needed to with $20,000 in Bitcoin. No one's going to know. And that itself, or if you need to pay someone for something and you want to keep it quiet, you can send the money very easily. And so I think it's nice to have it. Once you kind of get into it, you should really take custody of it and keep it on your own devices. And
So,
Robinhood doesn't let you take custody.
so like if you
Right.
have a Coinbase as an exchange and you're buying through Coinbase, are you suggesting that you move it to a virtual wallet every so often? Like what does that look like? And when I say virtual wallet, I'm sure our listeners out there are like, well, what the heck is that?
Yeah, so it's a complicated space, right? I have a service called Casa, CASA, like house in Spanish. And Casa, the way it works for me is I have three. I was sort of saying three keys. One on my phone, one is a physical hardware device. It's called a ledger, and then one is held by them. And that makes me feel very secure in having it and pulling it off the exchange. And so every time I buy, I wait for it to clear, and then I pull it off the exchange into my personal wallet. If you just keep it on a wallet on your computer, it can be a little more scary because the wallet might get hacked, someone could pull the money out. But keeping the actual, if you keep it on a relatively small amount, it's probably safe to keep it somewhere like Coinbase. But you have to be aware that they're not insured, so if it gets stolen, typically the money's gone. And and you don't really have full control over it. So if there's been situations in the past where the government has taken assets like this from people, and maybe you want to protect yourself from that if it were to happen.
Yeah, and that's my that's one of the questions I always have is anything gets you mentioned it's one of the top 10 performing assets over the last decade, and whenever anything gets big like that, it starts getting a target on its back, right? So there are people that
Mm-hmm.
are saying, whoa, are you telling me there's something that's not being taxed maybe or not being regulated that we could kind of get our grubby hands on and stuff and
Mm-hmm.
so because that's a fear, right? And is that like a
Mm-hmm.
legitimate concern or a fear before moving into some cryptocurrency?
I think having a small percentage makes sense for everyone. And I think if you want to have a small percentage, one of my favorite ways is to buy this ticker GBTC. It's this company Grayscale that buys Bitcoin, they custody it. It's on the regulated exchanges, and so it's really easy to get access to it. But if you want to go the full route and really own it and control it, you should learn how to keep it secure and learn, I would recommend a multi-signature wallet, absolutely. Like either through Casa, who I have no affiliation with, or through someone else. But that way you can keep it more secure than just losing your password and having someone take your password, and they can kind of help you get back in. But yeah, it is. It's it sounds paranoid to say it, but it did happen. Like in the 1930s, it was illegal to own gold, and the government made everyone sell them their gold. This
Hmm.
like literally
I,
happened in the U.S. And so
I,
yeah.
I noticed this week, or last week, Janet Yellen even talking about, looking at Bitcoin and, maybe doing some kind of regulation around it. And all of a sudden it went from, 35,000 to 29,000. And then, now it's back up. But
Mm-hmm.
just some of that, even potential government interference causes it to move.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, who knows if that was what happened or if something else happened. I mean, I think
Yeah.
people tend to find the story sometimes after the movement, but there's definitely some concern about government action. And but also there's so many rich people that have it now. Those rich people are going to look out for their own interests. They're going to lobby politicians. They're going to protect it. And so I think I'm less concerned now. I think it's pretty much difficult to stop at this point. I think there's enough
Hmm.
interest in it that it's not going to get made illegal.
And Jeremiah, you had mentioned that there was, like gold, there was a finite amount of this created, right? There was 21 million. Is that what you said? 21 million coins created.
There's
Bitcoin
21
created?
million, yeah, Bitcoins ever. Gold is actually not that finite. I thought gold was more finite, but we
Okay.
actually increased the world supply of gold about 2% a year. So you obviously can't make more gold. It's a metal, right? Or it's a very difficult metal to, you'd have to do fusion or something, but there's plenty of it in the Earth's crust. And so Bitcoin is actually at this point, we're making less Bitcoin than we are making new gold.
So how does that work with like Bitcoin mining companies? Have they made all 21 million yet, or is it to be still continue to be mined?
The way it works right now is in the beginning, basically every 4 years, the supply cuts in half. And so we're not going to hit that 21 million cap until 2140, I think is the year. So we got a while to go. Or maybe anyway, it's at least 100 years away. So right now, every 10 minutes, something called a block is created. And when the block is created, 6.5 Bitcoin get created. And those kind of get split among everyone who runs it. And so you can do the math and figure out how much money is being paid to sort of sustain the network every day.
One thing that made the most sense to me, Jeremiah, I've heard you explain it, is that Bitcoin is a store of value. The same way that people were buying up Beanie Babies in the mid 90s. They were like, hey, I'm going to hold on to this Beanie Baby and it's, going to hold its value and then I'll use it later. So not even like, I think cryptocurrency spooks people out. But when you think about it, like, hey, like you said, it's scarce, it's secure. I'm going to buy it now and it's going to appreciate and then I'll use it later for whatever it's useful for. Like, can you talk a little bit more as a concept of store of value?
Yeah, exactly. So the store of value, everyone has stuff. Like I'm looking at, Chris has this guitar behind him, which if that's a Les Paul, it's probably going to sell for what you paid for it, right? Or pretty close to what you paid for it. So a lot of people have these things, speakers, old Mustangs, Rolex watches, guitars, that are, the lamp, that, they persist in value over time, right? And a lot of people will buy that. They'll buy art, they'll put their money or their, stocks or any of that sort of stuff. Houses, especially, we actually have a lot of things we own that we don't own just to use them. We also own because we think they're going to appreciate in value or maintain value. And that's been a thing for me for a long time is, I'll buy sometimes the more expensive version of something knowing that I can sell it for more money later when I want to. But I think Bitcoin, when you look at a lot of the behavior, basically because our money supply, like $100 every year buys a little bit less. People don't want to keep their money in $100 bills. You don't shove your money under your mattress. And you also, generally, you don't keep more than a couple $1,000s in your bank account is generally what people do. And so, people will go out and they'll buy stocks, they'll buy land, they'll buy farm animals, they'll buy houses, they'll buy, maybe not boats, but, people buy stuff to sort of spread their value around with the idea that it'll persist over time. The nice thing about Bitcoin in particular is it's super high energy and super synthetic, right? So you can basically keep as much Bitcoin. You could keep $1,000 in Bitcoin on your phone, or you could keep $100 million of Bitcoin on your phone, and you get the same things. You get that no one knows you have it. You get that you can send it very quickly across the world. You get that you can leave town and not worry about it. And so it's a lot more efficient, I think. Once people start to believe that it's a store of value and start to notice that it's been going up in value over time, it's much more efficient to have your money in Bitcoin than to do things like, buying paintings or buying fancy furniture as a way to sort of store value. Doesn't mean you shouldn't buy those things and keep them. But when you look at what a lot of people outside the country do, there's a lot of people who buy houses in the United States just because it's a secure way to keep their money somewhere else. And I think that'll start to go down.
Yeah. Can I make a comment? I'd like to go back to real quick, say something that John had likened buying Bitcoin as a store of value to buying Beanie Babies. So I just want to kind of clarify for John. I can right now on Amazon buy 10 assorted tag-on Beanie Babies for $20. So I'm not sure if that maybe is what we want to be going with the cryptocurrency. So I think I would press you for another analogy, John. Find something more of a store of value, unless you have a lot of Beanie Babies that you collected yourself. I hate to bust your bubble though.
Well, it's a good thing I was good at track because I think my parents thought that Beanie Babies were going to pay for college at some point. No, how about like an original Mustang from 1964 or something? That would probably be a pretty solid store of value.
Well, it's like anything. If there's a right, there's got to be a market for it, and it's like even if you're selling stock, if you own a ton of like Home Depot stock, but no one's buying that stock, then again, it's the value on it's a demand, right? It's based on demand.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, what's the principle, Jeremiah, the value of the network, and Bitcoin surpassed that number that it's like, hey, it's here now. It's not going away. Enough people believe in it that it's probably not just going to evaporate. Yeah,
there was a rule. It's not really a rule, but it's something someone noticed. Once a network reaches $100 billion in value, it tends to stick around. And you can look at that with like Facebook or Google, or just, there's a lot of businesses in the world that have this network effect, and once things get into them, they just continue to grow. Like Netflix in general gets the best shows, right? Because they have the most audience, and it kind of feeds on itself. And so I think that, yeah, there's a good chance now that, there's millions and millions of people coming into Bitcoin, that it keeps getting that network effect. And I think on the Beanie Baby topic, Bitcoin looks like Beanie Babies every 4 years. Every 4 years you look at it, and it seems to go through this huge spike in value and then come crashing down. And I expect that'll happen this year. I think it's going to go up. I think it's going to hit incredibly high levels, and then I think it's going to crash down. But every time it hits a level that seems to be about 10x higher than it was, and it seems to crash down to something about 10x higher than it was. And so, Beanie Babies came and they went, and then they were gone. And Bitcoin's kind of this thing that doesn't seem to die. It seems like every 4 years it goes through this crazy cycle up and down. And so if you have the stomach to hold on to it, kind of the lesson people have learned is if you buy enough that you're comfortable, you hold on to it over a 4 or 10-year period of time, you can really make quite a bit of money out of it. And have, versus, just be careful not to dump all your money in at the top and then sell it all at the bottom.
Yeah. People day trade this stuff too, all the time, right? I mean, they're watching the spikes and moving it as almost like their full-time job.
It sounds like it's going up and to the right, which is where you want it to go. But we say if we're looking at a graph, up and to the right, right? So it may have some peaks and valleys along there, but it's still going up and to the right.
So what's the whole breakdown, Jeremiah, on this whole like decentralized finance sort of talk? Is that close by, or is that ever going to happen? And what does that mean?
I think it's really interesting. I mean, if you go to your bank, like a typical bank, Chase or something, they're going to offer you almost zero, right? Like some number on your interest rate that's so close to zero that it's like, it might as well be zero, right? Like 0.0025% or something. If you go to an online bank, maybe they'll offer you 0.5%. If you lend money on DeFi, it's crazy. You can get like 8% sometimes on your money, but I don't think it's worth the risk. Just personally, I think, I have things that I think DeFi is going to be very interesting. I think it's interesting that we can lend each other money and do a lot of the things we would typically go to a bank for. We can do those now distributed without trust. But as far as an investment, I want things to be either very secure or I want them to grow a lot. And DeFi to me is neither of those two. It's kind of risky and not growing fast enough for how risky it is. But very interesting space for like the next couple of years for sure.
You mentioned something pretty cool. You said, "Hey, I can have $20,000 of Bitcoin and just pop smoke and leave the country if I want to, and no one would ever know. And I'll still have my $20,000 value of Bitcoin when I get to where I'm going." You've done quite a bit of traveling in kind of your life. Where's one of the coolest places you've ever been?
Been to a lot of countries. I think I don't really count, not like a numbers game for me. It's just the interesting places. But I spent a month in Vietnam motorcycling around the country. And I spent about 6 or 7 months living in Cambodia. So I love those smaller countries. And I think that's why I'm warmer on this idea, of the Bitcoin stuff, because I've seen a lot of people in like Japan, for example, they own fancy old cameras and they use them as stores of value. And you'll go in the store and you'll see them, or you'll see fancy watches. And it's kind of very common in countries where the banking may not be as robust. Japan's not like that, but more developing countries where the banking is not as robust, you can see this kind of behavior of people buying small, expensive objects that they can carry with them when they need to go somewhere. But yeah, I've traveled Japan, Vietnam, Cambodia, Bangladesh, a little bit in China. So a lot of cool countries.
Cool. Yeah. So I spent a little bit of time in some parts of Southeast Asia as well. So you're getting over there and you're going to Vietnam, you're going to some of these parts, and then you're like, Cambodia. So I'm gonna hang out here, marinate here for 6-7 months, or talk to me how you came to that.
Cambodia was kind of a fluke. I went to visit a friend. A friend from high school was living there, and I went to visit him. And the people were very, very nice. The country was very, very inexpensive, and it just seemed like a cool place to park. I was working on a lot of photography, and when you reach a country and you realize you can rent an apartment for $250 a month, and there's someone who does your laundry for you. I mean, the landlady would come in and do my laundry, and she would clean the apartment, and I could go downstairs and get breakfast for $5. And I was a little short on cash, but it's a good spot to just like, I'm going to spend a year living here. not spend that much money, get to know people. And I think because of that, Cambodia, at least at the time, had a huge sort of scene of artists. There were a lot of photographers, there were a lot of painters living there, because you could get a place very affordably and you could just kind of persist, without having to. Coming from California at the time, where rent was $1,500 for a tiny little apartment, it was a big change to sort of see Cambodia like that.
Yeah, so something in it must have, and I've seen some of your photos and everything. They're fascinating. It's really cool work, man. And so something probably said, "Hey, I want to do a little bit more." Tell me a little bit about your documentary and your project that you have going on in Cambodia.
Yeah, so I was living in Cambodia and I started emailing professional journalists because I thought I wanted to be a photojournalist. And at the time, this was really when Instagram was starting to take off, and so I was just on the wrong side of a trend, right? I mean, there were photography as a job was just getting destroyed. So most of the people I knew, I met a lot of journalists while I was there. Most of them have moved on to other kinds of work, and they do journalism for fun, but it's not really a sustaining thing. But this is actually a good story related to that. The two journalists I worked with, one of them was a freelancer, and one of them had done a lot of work for the New York Times. And they found a charity that wanted to make a big project to explain sort of water issues on the Mekong River to a big group of people. And so what we did is we sent those guys all the way up the Mekong River. So it goes through Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and I think China. I'm not sure if it may go through one other country, but it's this very long river that basically starts in Tibet and winds its way all the way down into Vietnam. And one of the challenges of that river is that anytime someone upstream puts something in the river, it's going to affect everyone all the way downstream. And so I remember, Cambodia gets a lot of their protein. There's a lot of people in Cambodia who are very, very, the word persistence, I'm trying to remember, subsistence living, right? Living on less than $500 a month or something like that. And they'll go farm fish out of the river and they'll eat the fish, and that's how they feed their family. And I some of the charity work I did just made it very sad, because you realize in America, I think we tend to think of people, there's different attitudes towards poverty, but one of the attitudes towards poverty is these people could have done something about it, right? But it was 100% clear in the situation they could have done nothing about it. I'm sure that happens a lot in America too, but I remember very visibly seeing, it's a guy, he's a rice farmer, he gets fish out of the water, his kids are getting sick all the time. It's raining, and so his kids are sick, it's raining, he can't work in his field, he doesn't have a book he can read, he can literally do nothing, and he's just sitting underneath his house. And so seeing some of that, and seeing like there's people who literally have no options, or like basically no options of what they can do, was very eye-opening to me. And so working in the charity on the documentary just to show people more of those issues. I did none of the photography, I just did some of the coordination, but I think it was a great project.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I love to hear kind of the passion behind it, and just raising awareness, right? And you're right, man. I think a couple things there is one, we're extremely fortunate in America that we don't realize what rivers and geography do. I mean, we have so much of it, but if you ever read the book Accidental Superpower, it talks about geopolitics, and now really like through dumb luck, we were born in America, and we have these rivers and these natural systems. So many parts of the country, you look at like ancient Egypt, like they're dependent on rivers, right? And you're talking the Mekong Delta, like those folks that's where it provides. And when someone affects that, upstream and at the headwaters, it has this downstream effect. That's the first thing. But the second thing is, and you gotta, one of the greatest things I think we can do as just people is just go live somewhere else for a while. Right. Just get out of America, man. And there's so much perspective to be had. And so that's really cool. Tell me about the movie itself. I believe it's a River's Tale. Is that?
Yeah, it's actually not a movie. It's a photo documentary. So
photo documentary. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So what they did is Luke and Gareth, who were the two principal photographers, brought along a videographer and traveled reverse up the Mekong. So starting in Vietnam at the delta of the Mekong and then working their way back towards Tibet. And along the way, doing photography and doing writing to sort of tell the story of what's going on in the Mekong River, or even sort of adjacent stories to the Mekong River at that spot. And there's a website, a River's Tale. I think it's a riverstale.com, which has all of their stories and shows everything they did. And yeah, I mean, my job on that was marketing and working through some of the logistics to figure out exactly where they should go, figure out, what kinds of photos to take, what might kind of resonate. And the whole goal of the project was it was basically an awareness project. It was nice in that it wasn't, it was just the charity's ambition was to make a piece of art that would be a reference for people to understand these water issues for a long period of time.
Awesome. That's good stuff, man. That's good action. So are you involved at all in are you San Francisco Bay Area? That's where you're based out of now? So what do you photography around there, this is a hobby now, and it sounds like you got your cryptocurrency you're trading. You obviously got your day job, you got your coaching stuff you're doing as well. Finding time to snap some shots, snap some photos.
Mostly with my phone these days, but I think phones have gotten so good. I got the 12 Pro Max, right? And it's like better than almost any camera I've ever had. And especially because it's in my pocket all the time. And I think as I've gotten more skilled at photography, I realized the camera doesn't matter that much. And especially having a camera that good, I'm probably just going to sell my main camera and shoot with this for now. But yeah, not so involved in photography these days. Mostly a lot of coaching, a lot of Bitcoin, and a lot of full-time work.
Yeah, well, that's good stuff. And listen, I appreciate you joining us this afternoon for you, this evening for us. It's been fascinating to learn about, it's kind of some of the stuff. And as you said, a statistician, or we'll say data scientist. I know. I learned a little bit about Bitcoin. I know John and Chris really appreciated all that insight you brought. And I love hearing about people's passion, which is photography. What we say here on Dudeology Show is there is no ordinary. Do more, be better. We are a movement for just dudes to just be better and make the world a better place. So we appreciate you supporting that. For all our listeners and our viewers, if you could go and we're asked all the time, hey, what can we do to help you guys out? What you can do is you can like and you can share, and you can subscribe on iTunes or any of the listening platforms, as well as YouTube. And we will talk to you next time. Jeremiah, appreciate it. Have a good evening, brother.
Thanks, Jeremiah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to Dudeology. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share. For a full library of shows and more information about Dudeology, check us out on social media at Dudeology Show or dudeologyshow.com.